1. Since you said imaginary, there was a punishment shown on Star Trek Deep Space Nine that Black Mirror copied a couple of times, and science fiction has used it as a concept, likely before DS9. The concept is time dilation, the idea that time takes place at a different rate in the real world than it does in some other. So, for the punishment, the character Miles O'Brien was strapped in a chair for an hour and sedated, and he dreamed he served a 10-year prison sentence. Or maybe it was longer, but in his mind, he was trapped in this cell for years and years. In the dream, he may have been deprived of food, and he was definitely deprived of social interaction, but at the end of it, he woke up and only an hour had passed. Actually, the Best Next Generation episode, The Inner Light, played with time dilation as well. Same with the Best Voyager episode, Blink of an Eye. Also, there is a short horror manga story called The Long Dream by Junji Ito that has this concept. A man is admitted to a hospital because every night his dreams are longer. Slowly, his dreams become long enough for him to experience an entire lifetime in a single night, only to wake up and barely remember what the reality is. Eventually, the dreams become thousands of years long and, well, things become very, very horrifying. I highly recommend it. Story 2. Being forced to keep your arms up all the time. This is a very common punishment for children in Korea. Source, my mom is Korean, and she used this as a punishment when I was a kid. We had to kneel on the floor with our hands straight up in the air. They ached so bad after even just 5 minutes, and sometimes had to go up to 30 minutes at a time. Story 3. Tickling. It doesn't leave a mark, so it's also used in environments like mental facilities where patients may be restrained and staff go on a power trip. Extreme cases can result in incontinence, vomiting, and a loss of consciousness due to the inability to breathe. It's also more accessible for the torturer to do it for a long time without it wearing away at their conscience because the victim is involuntarily laughing, so it's easier to pretend that it's not that bad. Story 4. Outlawry. To be declared an outlaw. Today, we think of an outlaw as just anybody who breaks the law regularly. Back in the day, though, it was a punishment. If you were declared outlaw, that meant that you were literally outside of the law and could claim no protection from it. When the stories refer to Robin Hood as an outlaw, that's what they're talking about. It's not romantic, heroic, swashbuckling thing. It's the state of having no claim to any legal protection. The king or whoever he appoints takes your land. Anybody who wants it can take your stuff. Story 5. Listening to the same song on a loop, then skipping parts of the song. This was a form of torture used by the CIA, and it's absolutely awful. Effectively, if a song is played for hours upon hours nonstop with no sign of stopping, you'll get used to it, you'll learn the lyrics, the timing, and even minor things like individual drum beats, and you begin to normalize it. But if you have the song skip or start over after 3 days, you realize that something happened and it's not supposed to happen. Your brain got so used to knowing the melody that it effectively tries to send a panic response when something disrupts the song. It would be like seeing an abnormally large bruise come out of nowhere. You'd begin to panic. Story 6. Kneeling on grains of uncooked rice. My grandmother used to tell me a story back when she was in high school about one of her boyfriends getting tortured by letting him kneel in sea salt by his parents when her friend said to his parents that he was gay. It happened, I think, in the early 1950s when being gay was not really talked about much and it was treated as a grave sin as it contradicts the religious faith they uphold. My grandmother said he would go to school with scarred knee marks and one day found on the street crying hard that it feels like fainting because of the pain in his knees to the point where her friend can't even walk anymore. Her friend told her to keep it a secret, but the way his knee looks was too horrible she had to report it, so a day before she was about to report it, her friend was in the hands of the authorities and his father was captured after neighbors reported it. Grandma said that the neighbors are concerned for her friend after her friend had been screaming and crying for 4 days straight. One time, 3 neighbors felt like something was wrong and kept an eye on their house and saw her friend kneeling with salt for a whole day. They reported it to the officials immediately. That was about the last time Grandma heard about her boyfriend, and right now he might be dead, but she hopes everything was well for him. Story 7. Painting rocks. A couple of guys in my unit got in trouble. The sadistic drill sergeant tried being creative with an approved punishment, which was painting rocks. The drill sergeant faced pretty heavy administrative action. I don't recall exactly what, but it was probably one of the most severe I had ever heard a drill sergeant receive. Now, drill sergeants come up with some off-the-wall punishment, it seems, mostly with no oversight. Sounds like this one took it too far. I remember in my unit, we had a guy who neglected and disrespected a canine, didn't feed it and clean up after it when he should have, and as punishment, he was forced to clean up after it with bare hands for the next 2 days. and keep the dog waste in his pocket throughout PT. I was next to him too, still remember the awfulness of that baking in the hot sun throughout the day. I think my favorite punishment I witnessed was for four privates in basic training who refused to shower. In full boots, he had them all roll on the ground up and down this short incline behind the barracks in the grass while he sprayed them with a hose, and they all did it in cadence, lol. Story 8. Waterboarding. If any of you kids don't know, this was a big debate back in the early 2000s. Some people were calling it torture, others were more or less like, it's literally just pouring water on someone's face, what's the big deal? Now, when you put it like that, yeah, what's the big deal? Take someone, make them lie down, and hold them down so they can't move and pour water on their face. What's the big deal? I remember one conservative radio host got the bright idea to prove live and on the air that it's not as bad as they are saying by having his staff waterboard him on air. And you know what? I respect this guy for doing this. He had a strongly held belief and he was willing to go through it to try and prove his point. He lasted all the 15 seconds before he tapped out, hacked and coughed for about 5 seconds, and finally managed to say, definitely torture, before suggesting they go to a break so he can recover from that. Good on him for admitting he was wrong at the very least. Story 9. Closing your hand around a chunk of salt water ice and holding it there. Dubbed the salt and ice challenge, where people hold on to it for as long as it can stand, it can lead to frostbite injuries similar to second and third degree burns. I did this about 20 years ago before it was a thing on social media. It sucks. Story 10. Isolation. There's a reason solitary confinement is considered a form of torture. The human mind isn't designed to function in an environment devoid of stimulation or social interaction. It was cool going to Alcatraz and doing the audio tour. You go into one of the solitary confinement cells with the door closed behind you. It's pitch black, and while you're in there, you hear stories from inmates, dramatically read, about what it was like and how some of them would focus their mind until they could see a tiny speck, and within that, they could conjure an imaginary television screen and see moving images. Help them to stop going crazy. Story 11. Has anyone seen that Black Mirror White Christmas episode? Imagine being locked in a room with nothing, like really nothing, and all you have is endless boredom. That's horrifying. I can't remember what country used it, Russia or Japan, I think, but one punishment was genuinely known as the white. You'd be given white clothes and locked in a cell with white walls, no windows, and a completely white door. You'd get a light bulb on a white fixture, but no light shade. Your bed and its linens would also be white, and you would be fed exclusively on white rice in a white bowl with white cutlery, and to drink, you would get water in a white cup. After a day or two, you'd begin to hallucinate because of the lack of visual stimulation. Story 12. My cousin, 10 years old, quite agile, never sits still. Once he troubled my aunt so much that she punished him. His punishment was to sit still on the bed and do nothing. No TV, no playing either on phone or with his toys, not even speaking. And no one was allowed to come to his room, so he can't even watch others. He asked her to read his textbook as he thought studying would lessen her anger, but she denied even studying. He had to sit completely still. Initially, that punishment seemed quite simple to me, but what impact it had on a small child was huge. This punishment tortures you by boring you, which a small child can't take. At last, he broke down crying, after which he was pardoned. Story 13. Chinese water drop torture. Victims were strapped down so that they could not move, and cold or warm water was then dripped slowly onto a small area of the body, usually the forehead. The forehead was found to be the most suitable point for this form of torture because of its sensitivity. Prisoners could see each drop coming, and after long durations were gradually driven frantic as a perceived hollow would form in the center of the forehead. Story 14. Peel salted sunflower seeds with your bare hands. Had the choice between that and getting my butt beaten with a cable when I screwed up big time when I was like 6 years old. Chose the peeling, and I regretted that immensely. It doesn't sound bad at first, but let me tell you, after 1 hour, you just want to hold your hands in ice water. Your fingertips get sore, sometimes you prick your skin and the salt dries out your fingers and makes them really sensitive. I never chose that punishment again. Story 15. Famine walls. This was something I had never heard of until I took a trip to Ireland and saw them firsthand. These were famine walls, and they were built during the famine of the 1840s as a means to keep the hungry masses out of the estates of the landowners. We learned it was usually homeless Catholics who built the walls for a few scraps to eat. According to our guide, massive, largely pointless work projects like the famine walls and the famine roads kept the masses barely alive during the 4 years the potato crop failed. The British rule proclaimed that the poor had to work for sustenance and not be given charity. So just think about how demoralizing this would be day after day, building stone walls with zero purposes just to earn your bread and suit for the day. But the shocking thing is the scope of the famine walls. They're literally everywhere in the countryside as far as you can see. Story 16. Being found not guilty by reason of insanity. No matter the length of the sentence you are given, it is up to the doctors to determine when you can be released. A sentence of 10 years in a psychiatric facility could mean 20, 30, or life. The doctors will only release you when they determine it's safe for you to re-enter society and you are no longer a threat. So what doctor is going to release someone and take the chance you'll reoffend? Almost none. You'll also be given medications that have terrible side effects. You'll put on a bunch of weight, feel sleepy all the time, dizzy, and eventually develop repetitive movements. You'll be in the general population with other people suffering from severe mental illness, which can drive you crazy in itself. The upside is maybe it's slightly cleaner than regular prison. You have a little bit more space to move around, the entire unit, even though it's going to be small, and eventually you can earn day passes. Compared to regular prison, it may be a little better overall, but it is still a horrible way to spend your life. It's also incredibly difficult to have this defense apply to your case, so if someone does a crime and thinks they can just plead insanity and be out in 10 years, they're most likely not going to be found insane. Story 17. Any punishment where, even if it doesn't physically harm the person, you make them do it for a long time. I was punished at a very young age, somewhere between 7 and 10, for not being manly, so my stepfather, the of all time, decided to toughen me up. He sat me down on the sofa and told me under no circumstances was I allowed to leave the sofa. If I needed the toilet, I was to tell him and he would let me go to the bathroom, but if I took longer than a few minutes, he would come in to make sure I wasn't hiding. Now that doesn't sound so bad, sitting on the sofa. Shh, that wasn't my punishment. My punishment to toughen me up is I was to sit on the sofa, not moving and not allowed to look away, and he put on horror movie after horror movie after horror movie all day, from morning to my bedtime, and these were like 80s horror movies, Prince of Darkness, Poltergeist, Hellraiser, Night of the Demons, the OG Evil Dead, not the sequels, and the Living Dead films. I love horror now that I'm an adult, but for a little kid like me back then, I literally couldn't sleep properly or speak for a week. And I'm pretty sure I'm mentally messed up in some ways, but that was just an example of how much of an utter, and I'm sorry, Americans, this freak was. Story 18. Something I kinda actually did to myself. So I needed to cut weight for a wrestling tournament in a drastic way. Because of a mix-up in weight classes, I needed to drop 16 pounds overnight. Told my coaches that's not possible, just pull me from the roster, but my head coach pulls me aside and tells me there might be a way and you don't even have to work out. What you have to do is fill a bathtub up with the hottest water you can stand and add a bag of Epsom salt and some rubbing alcohol to the water. Go into the bathroom with a buddy, stuff towels under the doors so cool air can't get in, and then get in the tub neck deep. After 60 seconds, your body will already be screaming to get out of the water because you're overheating. I stayed in for 45 minutes, adding more hot water every 2 to 3 minutes to ensure the hell never ended. The buddy is there to make sure you don't die. I sweat out 11 pounds in 45 minutes. Story 19. I don't know if someone has mentioned it here before, but silent treatment and stonewalling, especially coming from a loved one, creates a terrible imbalance in the relationship and serious psychological trauma for the stonewalled individual. No one should ever choose this method to punish the other. My parents did this when I brought home bad grades. They'd explode at first and yell a lot, then pretend I didn't exist for the next few days. They'd still feed me and drive me where I needed to go, but just the bare minimum for communication. I would always dread hearing the garage door open when my mom came home because I knew I would be greeted by her silence. My dad got over things quicker because he was the one who always had to drive me everywhere. I'm in college now and never open up about school. It doesn't matter if I bomb a test or if I ace it, if I slept in or missed a lab, or if I had a really stressful presentation. I just always say good when my parents ask how I'm doing. No way in hell I'm giving them my student login info either. I have a somewhat cold relationship with them right now. Sometimes I wonder why, like all the reasons why. I try to mend it because I was a huge ass to them as well, and sometimes I still lose my temper at them, but I find myself thinking how much of this is actually their fault and how much is mine. I wonder all the time which things I'm on the right side of and which I'm on the wrong side of. They are also first generation immigrants. English isn't their native language, whereas I was born and raised in the US, so there's a language gap, and that really muddies things up as well. I end up wondering how much that contributed to our distancing.